Irreverent, entertaining, cool. You're listening to LA Talk Radio.
You're listening to The Innervoice with Dr. Foojan Zeine, only on LA Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Foojan Zeine, and welcome to The Innervoice Show. This is a show about making a difference in your life so that you can create a free mind and a heart filled with love toward creating a fulfilled life for yourself. I'll bring you the latest research in the realm of human sciences, and we'll talk to experts in their field to bring you the jewel of their knowledge and wisdom. Let me tell you a little bit about my latest book, Life Reset, The Awareness Integration Path to Creating a Life You Want. And this book is the latest psychological model that has been presented to you in a series of exercises, which you can complete in your own time. In this model and in this book, the awareness integration has been researched and published with many groups in latest research with Cal State Long Beach with their students, which resulted in 68% decrease in depression and 27% decrease in their anxiety. And this was only on a self-study format. And that's why I also put that in the book in an exercise format so you can enjoy and really become aware of yourself and integrate the different parts of you which are kind of maybe lost or in the background or in your subconscious, and how you can bring them together. So when you want to make a decision in life, you'll make it with all of you and not just part of you. You can get the Life Reset book from my website, Foojan.com, F as in Frank, OOJAN.com. If you like to consult with me, I'd love to see you. I have my offices in Irvine, Woodland Hills, and Brentwood in California, or I consult online with different people around the world. And for that also, you can go to Foojan.com. I'm so excited to have Dr. Joffe Ellis with me today, and we'll be right back to tell you a little bit about a research from Stanford and then get to talk to Dr. Joffe Ellis. So, the latest research that was happening in 2017, a study in Stanford University, the Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education by Drs. Jazayeri, Lee, Jinpu, Gross, and Golden. Now, this study was done for the hypothesis of altering the trajectory of affect regulation, the impact of compassion training and mindfulness, and to see if learning the compassion training and having compassion with mindfulness, such as being aware of yourself and being aware of your emotions and looking at how to come to terms with those emotions, regulate them, and be with them and release them, and bringing yourself into compassion. And as you trained your body and mind and emotions to do that, participants reported greater acceptance in the face of stress and or anxiety. Wow, so obviously this research is also showing that meditation, mindfulness, and compassion training, to not only to meditate, but also have an intentionality of bringing yourself into compassion, it will bring down the stress and anxiety. So today we're also going to talk about the power and compassion of Rational Emotive Behavioral Therapy with Dr. Joffe Ellis. Dr. Joffe Ellis was born and raised in Melbourne, Australia, a licensed psychologist in Australia and licensed mental health counselor in New York, an adjunct professor at Columbia University in New York City. She's a presenter and a writer. She's affiliated with several major psychological associations and societies, including membership in the Australian Psychological Society and international affiliate membership in the American Psychological Associations. For years, she worked with her husband, the brilliant and renowned pioneer of modern cognitive therapies, Dr. Joffe Ellis, giving public presentation and professional trainings in his approach of Rational Emotive Behavior Therapy, REBT, as well as collaborating with him on writing and research projects until his death in 2007. She continues to present, practice, and write about his groundbreaking psychotherapeutic approach of REBT. Recognized as the world-renowned expert on REBT, she's featured in a DVD produced by the American Psychological Association demonstrating and discussing the approach. APA also published a book, Rational Emotive Behavioral Therapy, that she co-wrote with her husband. Welcome to my show, Dr. Debbie Joffe Ellis.
It is such a pleasure to be with you again. Among your many skills and gifts, Dr. Zeine, is the warm and insightful questions you ask when you're interviewing people, and it's my pleasure to be with you again and with your listeners.
Yes, you have such a special, and every time I talk about it, I get goosebumps. You have such a special place for me in my heart. And you know me, I'm a crier all the time. So for our listeners to know that my first book, Online Therapy, when I was writing it, and we called Debbie, Dr. Joffe Ellis, and we said, can we send the book to Dr. Ellis so that he could read it maybe and do some sort of a writing for it. And then you actually brought the book to Dr. Ellis, and he accepted to and proposed to do the foreword to it, and it was such an honor. And then we came to your home in New York and met you and met Dr. Ellis, and that was not only an honor, but I had learned so much even with those couple of hours that I was with him, and humbled with watching who he was and how brilliant he was. So thank you for the opportunity that you had created for me.
My pleasure.
So today we're going to talk about the power and compassion. So I've definitely experienced the power of the Rational Emotive Behavior Therapy. And when I was working on creating the model of the awareness integration, I had actually learned something from you and Dr. Ellis, which was how the person can regulate their emotion by their thought and just their intention. And it was fantastic to see you and Dr. Ellis for someone who was so intensely experiencing emotion, and even whether it was rage or anxiety or sadness, and just to say to them, bring it down a couple of notch, or raise it up a couple of notch. And that was unfathomable for people. People usually think they can't control their emotions, and to give a directive and for the person really to take control of that was amazing for me to see, and I incorporated that part of it and the cognitive challenging into my own model, which was really, really helpful. But today you also want to talk not only about the power that it has, but also the compassion. So tell us about it.
Okay, well, first the power, to add to what you've just so eloquently described. It's such a pity that in schools, or I would guess most schools, children are not taught the difference between healthy emotions and unhealthy emotions, and the fact that it's not events, it's not what happens that creates our emotions, but as you touched on, the way we think about what happens, our thoughts, our perception of what happens, that creates the emotion. And so many people are sorely deprived of the knowledge of the fact that some so-called negative, not meaning bad, but not pleasant, some of these so-called negative emotions are healthy. They're appropriate, such as when a loved one dies, to feel sadness, to feel grief. But some of them are paralyzing. They're debilitating. And they include panic, anxiety, depression, rage, and so forth. So one aspect of the power of rational emotive behavior therapy is, number one, the fact that it educates us that we have a choice. It's not the circumstances, and by learning to think in healthy ways, we can create our own healthy emotions despite and including extremely adverse, rough, painful, brutal circumstances. And the tools are very powerful and very effective. They apply to mundane disappointments and global tragedies. In both cases and every situation in between, if one makes the choice, and it's a choice, to watch one's thinking, that's where the mindfulness comes in, to think about one's thinking, to identify the irrational thoughts, which are thoughts that blow things out of perspective or are damning or are hopeless, and to pause and dispute them and come up not with sugary, Pollyanna, unrealistic positive thoughts, but realistic, optimistic thoughts. Then we change our emotion. We have a healthier life and a happier life. And then, as you mention, the aspect of compassion, which filters through every cell, every pore of the REBT approach. And behind that is the emphasis, which one doesn't see. And I'm saying this for anyone with a bit of knowledge of psychology. I'm sure you have a broad spectrum of listeners, from those who are in the helping fields to those who are simply interested. So for those who know about cognitive psychology, REBT is the pioneering one. And there are a number of branches that followed rational emotive behavior therapy, including the famous cognitive therapy, cognitive behavior therapy, and others. Unlike most of those, rational emotive behavior therapy emphasizes the importance of unconditional self-acceptance, unconditional other acceptance, and unconditional life acceptance. And again, not just sprouting the nice philosophy of them, but offering the tools, the how-tos. I think knowledge is a nice first step, but it ain't going to get you as far as knowledge plus action. And what action? Effective tools.
One of the important conversations that I was just hearing from you is that we don't really learn how to do reality check. And even when we talk about reality, that if we were raised in an environment, which most of us are raised in that environment, where news is negative and something bad that just happened. And sometimes when where people are having fun, we tell them, get real, as if like getting real is really bad. So we have it as reality is negative and fantasy is sweet and positive. And I liked what you said, which is, well, I do need to check with reality, but not necessarily look at all the negative aspect of what is, but with every negative aspect of any condition, there's also the positive and optimistic level. Nothing is just negative. Everything that happens has both sides. You can look at it from both sides. And what I was hearing from you is to pull ourselves into the to the position of looking at the positive aspect and the optimistic aspect of reality, and then being real out there with it, with the behaviors that need to be done in order to create something for our life. And from that, because you are with reality, then the acceptance of reality and acceptance of who I am and who is in front of me and what the situation is, it's part of that reality check, and that can support me into moving along and seeing what action is needed to be done to create what I want.
That is so true and so wonderfully and clearly put. Yeah, and, when we are mindful and identify that we are creating an unhealthy emotion, I mentioned those a few minutes ago, and are willing to change our thoughts and get into a healthier space, then we're more likely to behave in productive ways, and certainly in non-destructive ways. Something that comes to mind that's very fresh because it just happened yesterday. And this is an example of applying healthy thinking to a very unpleasant situation in order to stay stable, anchored and calm in order to do the behaviors that can help us take the next step in our goal. What am I talking about? Someone very precious to me, we're having this conversation just before Thanksgiving and had arranged to travel by bus to visit family in another state. And arriving at the station a few minutes after getting out of the cab, wallet missing, not knowing where it was lost. The time is running out, the bus is going to go soon. Therein came the choice of allowing time on, oh no, this is terrible, or pause, breathe, stabilize, think, which is what he did. So, keeping calm, made an appropriate phone call, went to the lost and found department, got the phone call also of the cab company that he could call later, checked in on getting another bus, and was calm and didn't lose it. And by the way, another aspect of Rational Emotive Behavior Therapy is the reminder of the inseparable interplay between mind and emotions and health. And so the less we stress, when things we don't want happen or we don't get what we do want, then, the longer and healthier we'll live. Anyway, long story short, because this wise person was willing to just pause and not get into any debilitating kind of emotional state, he was able to be very productive as could be given the situation. So that's one example of a kind of daily life event. Now, in our times, unrest, violence, division in this country, politically, like none I've ever witnessed in my lifetime, even though, a good part of my lifetime I spent in Australia, followed the political news in America, the neglect of environmental issues that's going on. It would be so easy for those of us who are sensitive and care about the planet and care about other human beings to allow ourselves to feel enraged and or depressed and or anxious and think, well, it's natural, it's normal, I should feel this way. But those emotions are unlikely to help them choose more effective actions. Now, REBT doesn't say don't feel them, feel kind of neutral or nothing. No, REBT is all about feeling not only passion but also compassion. And those experiences really are not possible if we're in those unhealthy emotional states. So REBT teaches us how to think in the ways to create sadness and concern and healthy anger, meaning we have a choice, it's not blind rage. And when we feel those emotions, we can be passionately motivated, but we're not debilitating ourselves, and we're more likely to act in fruitful ways, helpful ways, compassionate ways. And the world needs this now. The world needs more of us to think in sane ways and feel healthily, passionate, and act in productive ways.
You're talking about the negative or unworkable, unhealthy emotions versus the healthy emotions. Can you talk a little bit more about that for our listeners in distinguishing the unhealthy and the healthy? Because some emotions might be very healthy in low intensity, and then they get unhealthy as the intensity goes higher. It's as if they are looked upon, if emotions are looked upon as signals, when the signal is low, just to get your attention so you can do something about it, it's the healthy part of it, is the natural part. But if it adds to the neurotic aspect and some thought form is behind it, which is consistently raising it, then it might not be healthy. But there are also emotions that, by virtue, because they're a little bit more complex emotions, which are only the byproducts of some irrational thinking, that no matter what, they might be unhealthy. Can you explain a little bit between the two of them?
With pleasure, yes, of course. So the non-debilitating, healthy emotions that, as I said, can motivate us to take action, it's not that they let us be complacent, include sadness and disappointment, healthy grief, healthy anger, regret, because if we make mistakes or act badly, as you know, there's an assumption in REBT that at the heart of a person who isn't severely disturbed is a leaning towards morality and fine ethical behavior. And so there's that kind of assumption that most of us will want to choose to act in ways that do less harm and do more good. And so when we have those emotions in response to not getting what we want or getting what we very much don't want, then, as I mentioned before, we can be more productive. The unhealthy ones, rage, depression, panic, fear, anxiety, intense stress, guilt, shame, jealousy. Now, what's the difference, very quickly and briefly, between healthy and unhealthy thinking? I'll start with unhealthy, because healthy is the opposite of unhealthy. The unhealthy, irrational thinking that creates any one or many of the unhealthy negative emotions I just mentioned includes demands, saying it should be this way, you should act this way, you should think the way I do, I should always do well, I should always be loved and approved of, the world and people in it should be fair and just, should, must, demands, rigid thinking. The healthy component of that would be having preferences and desires but not demands. Then another aspect of unhealthy irrational thinking is blowing things out of perspective and exaggerating them, rather than in healthy rational thinking keeping a healthy perspective, and sometimes utilizing humor can help us do that. Another aspect of unhealthy irrational thinking is low frustration, tolerance thinking. I must have what I want when I want it, little baby that I am, instead of healthily developing high frustration tolerance, where we remind ourselves, I can stand what I don't like, I just don't like it. And then there are a few more aspects, but in the interest of time, I want to mention one of the most important aspects of irrational thinking versus rational thinking. That is the damnation of oneself when we don't do as well as we think we should. The hatred, bitterness, and damnation of other people when we think they acted in rotten ways and not the way we think they should. And finally, the hatred and damnation of the world, or overgeneralizing, thinking the world is so rotten right now, instead of realistically thinking, well, this happening is very rotten and this is brutal, but there are other things in life that still are good. You see, and so when we think in those irrational ways, and there are some additional ones, we create the negative, unhealthy ones I mentioned. Now, one of the common questions to me, Dr. Zeine, is how can you expect expect me to have unconditional other acceptance of someone who has acted in brutal ways. Because unconditional acceptance is the antidote to the damnation that I just mentioned. Unconditional self, unconditional other, and unconditional life acceptance. And the answer is as follows. Let's say someone has committed a brutal, evil act, which unfortunately happens way too often. And I have a goal in this one life I have that's going way too quickly to minimize unhealthy emotions and to prevent hatred and bitterness from growing inside of me and then creating illnesses. Then here is what I'll tell myself, and believe me, I have practiced what I'm now preaching, if to use that word, and it works. If I'm willing to consider that if I had had experiences in my upbringing that the evildoer had had, if I had the brain chemistry that evildoer has, if I had the disturbances that evildoer has, because someone who's not brain disturbed does not commit evil deeds. If I had the experiences in my teenage years, in my adulthood, that he or she had had, and if I was thinking what they thought the moment they committed their crime, well, isn't it highly likely I would have done the same thing? Now, that doesn't get them off the hook. Oh, with passion, I would want them to have consequences for their evil deeds. But by willing to think in the way I just described, maybe not immediately, but in time, I'll have compassion. And not only compassion, Dr. Zeine, but gratitude that I don't suffer from their debilitating ways. And that allows me such a healthy inner climate. And that's the way I want to live in my life.
Absolutely. What I hear from you that is resonating a lot is that sometimes we get caught into our own entitlement issues, as if I should be and the world should be and must be a particular way. And obviously the world will not, they didn't get the memo, so they are not going to apply what I think they should do. So I'm going to get consistently disappointed when I put myself into the position of entitlement of that. And when I get that I'm not entitled, that the world never promised that human beings and, the species did not necessarily promise that I come into this world and it's just going to be easy and rose garden and everybody is going to do what I'm asking them to do, then from that perspective I can look at me and the other and knowing that I am and others are. And if the compassionate aspect is to allow others to be, and it's that allowance, versus I don't allow you to be who you are and you have to be me and you have to do things in the way that I do. So that type of an allowance also creates some sort of a compassion, and it's easy to have that allowance when people are not doing anything that hurts me. But when it becomes personal, then my anger, hurt, resentment, the desire to revenge, the desire to hurt back shows up at that moment, and it's the compassion really matters at that point of the allowance that something happened. Let me take care of myself. Let me set the boundaries for myself, take care of myself, but then from there on allow the people as who they are, and try to understand that if I had the same circumstances, that I might possibly do the same thing. But even if I can't understand it, just to know that people are different, and all I need to be responsible for right now is how to protect myself and how to communicate and how to take care of myself and others from a nurturing place versus allowing the anger and the rage and the hatred and the revenge to show up as a revenge that could create more damage and hurt for everyone around.
Yeah, exactly. And You know, as you were saying that, it reminds me of many of the people who I work with, and a common heartache for many individuals is an absence of sufficient self-acceptance and self-worth, an absence of unconditional self-acceptance. So what I had described and what you just described in relation to attitudes towards others, some people actually find it easier to do that than to themselves, and they mistakenly think that if they do that to themselves, they're not being humble, or other, I want to say other such nonsense, because, you know, again, it's like potentially having an opportunity to feast on the most luscious food that's in front of you, and you're standing in front of it. I like tropical fruits, I'll say, you know, ripe mangoes, papaya, bananas, and it's there and you're hungry and you're not eating it. And it's there and you're hungry and you're not eating it. And in the same way, within us is the capacity to remind ourselves over and over we're worthwhile simply because we exist, and we're fallible, and we're likely to screw things up at times and make mistakes and fail at things that we wanted to succeed in. But that doesn't mean we're failures. That doesn't mean we're mistakes. And with a healthy attitude of unconditional self-acceptance, we can make the effort to have compassion on ourselves. And the more we do that, the easier it is to do it to others. I'm not saying it will be easy to do it to others, but easier. And the more compassion we express and work on having towards others, you know, that builds the muscle for self-compassion. And, you know, what a pity, what a shame that simply because in the case of many people, they don't know that it's possible to have greater self-compassion. They've never questioned their self-defeating attitudes towards themselves. They think this is how I am. This is how it should be. You know, I don't want to make myself all puffy and egotistic by thinking I have worth. Then it's like having those luscious fruit in front of you and you don't eat them. We have the ability to enjoy life more. Having compassion on ourselves won't make us into egotistic, narcissistic, entitled people. It will make us into warm-hearted, gentle folk who cherish life, who are models for other humans, that they don't have to be hard on themselves unnecessarily. And the more individuals are healthier emotionally, then the healthier their society can be. And, you know, it can take a long time, but step by step, they're the building blocks for a healthier planet, if we want to think, you know, on a larger global scale.
Absolutely. I've watched many of my clients and friends that when it comes to the conversation of unconditional acceptance towards self and others, sometimes they see it as a passive existence, and they don't know necessarily the difference between acceptance as a beginning concept, as a compassion concept, versus a passivity of that there's an allowance for impulsivity. And so I've watched people where they learned from their parents when they were disciplined in just accepting whatever a child did, would allow the child just to do impulsive actions and not learn and get themselves into trouble. So that type of parenting, it led into an internal conversation. It was interjected, then it turned into an internal conversation with themselves, where there's a voice inside of them now that is constantly disciplining them into and bad-mouthing them as a discipline versus disciplining them with unconditional acceptance and love and nurturance, where the acceptance comes from a part of me wants to do this and does this and has this, and yet my other parts hopefully are adult enough to also have different desires and look at the bigger picture and come in. But I don't have to damn a part of me because another part of me has the bigger picture. I could still accept that part, listen to that part, and love that part while I give I give the lead to the more adult part of me that can work. And maybe if there's more understanding of just what that love means and the acceptance means, that it's not just a passive side, but it's a beginning. It's a beginning and it's a safe ground to start from. And then they can, act appropriately and accordingly into any of the other positions, such as even when it comes to the acceptance of others, is accepting that this is a human being with different desires or different emotions or different intentions than maybe me, and maybe I don't agree with what they do, but I can still respect who they are as a human being and still set some boundaries and behave in a particular way where I can negotiate something with them versus damning who they are and their personality and needing to dominate them or destroy them.
Yeah, that's such an important point that you bring up. Acceptance in the context of REBT and unconditional acceptance absolutely does not mean passivity. Far from it. It means taking action to adopt a healthy perspective. Being passive is sitting back and, as you indicated just now, being somewhat inert and it can lead to a blasé kind of thing. And no, that's not what I or REBT recommends or encourages at all. Acceptance is actually sanity in REBT context, because it is reminding us to accept that what exists. One of the ways that people create their own emotional misery is saying that something that exists shouldn't exist. Well, lots of luck. If it exists, it exists. Now, we have the potential to change things going forward, but it's kind of futile to say what is shouldn't be when it is. Dr. Zeine shouldn't be a beautiful psychologist, but you are. So what's the point of me saying you shouldn't be? I could think of a whole lot of other contexts and other examples. So again, when REBT talks about unconditional acceptance, it is not about passivity. And so one of the ways to teach not only children but adults who weren't taught this is to teach or remind us that actions have consequences. And so, if I've done something kind of ridiculous or unhelpful, I better accept, well, it's done. I better accept I did wrong. But that doesn't mean I'm wrong. It means I'm a fallible human who made some wrong choices. It is as it is. To tell myself I shouldn't have when I already have done it is a waste of energy. Rather, to think, well, as a fallible human, I mucked up this time. Now, what can I do about it? It can be motivating to consider the consequences of my mistake in order to decide, well, what can I do not only to rectify this situation, but to prevent it from happening again? It all basically comes down to making our minds our friends, being willing to exercise our minds on a daily basis. There's some people who are beautifully disciplined in terms of taking care of their bodies, and they go to the gym and maintain a fabulous, healthy state of body and activity and so forth. And yet, either because they don't know it's a helpful thing to do or they're lazy, they may not bother. I'm not talking about people who go to the gym, I'm talking about some people, other people, to watch their mind and to exercise their brain in healthy ways. And just as in the gym, you know, if you do something in a thoughtless way, you use weights that are too heavy, you will suffer consequences. In the same way, if during, let's say, a painful time in our lives, we are lazily letting ourselves think this is awful and it shouldn't have happened to me and I can't stand it and it's hopeless, then we will dig our own deeper pit of despondency, depression, and worse. So it takes awareness that we can, it takes the knowledge of how to, and the determination and intention to make daily effort to use the gift of the mind. You know, anyone who's listening to this obviously has a functioning mind. We can use it to make our lives better, or we can be lazy and have better days and worse days, but not as enriching and fulfilling and potentially empowering a life that we could have.
Yes. As you were talking, it dawned on me also that most of our issues also comes from the non-acceptance, unconditionally non-acceptance of reality as is in front of us. We take so many hours in fighting with what the reality is, denying it, negating it. We tell it that it shouldn't be this way, fighting it. Or even if we take the unconditional acceptance, not only to myself and to the others, but also to the conditions of the reality that is. And then from there to start action and move along and do something about it. But I've really noticed many of the people who are depressed or anxious, a lot of the depression and anxiety comes with the non-acceptance of reality as is. I don't like it the way it is.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what you describe is the REBT component of you. Well, that encourages us. ULA to develop unconditional life acceptance. What you described is the absence of that ULA. Yeah, indeed. And again, how futile and actually destructive and a waste of energy to focus on what should be when right now it isn't. Better to acknowledge what is happening now in a certain situation may be toxic, poisonous, containing evil elements. It is existing, so waste of breath to say it shouldn't. It is. But then the next thought can be, what can I do about it? Mm-hmm. Rather than creating blind rage, which is at the heart of, I would say, practically every, if not every, terrorist activity.
Yes.
So it's a pity. It's a great pity to not also utilize the potential creativity that each one of us has. You know, to find solutions. Any situation has a multiple choice of possible responses. And again, when we have developed a habit of thinking in healthy ways, helped along by the fact that we have created healthy attitudes and emotions, then we can get playful, we can get creative, we can come up with a solution sometimes that's never been thought of before. For whether it's a problem in our own family, in our own life, in our own society, in our world. And when we're stuck in a groove of shooting on ourselves and rigid thinking, there is no room for uniqueness. There's no room for creativity. There's no room for giving birth to new solutions. You know, you mentioned my late husband, Dr. Albert Ellis. When he was studying psychology, Dr. Sigmund Freud was the lord of the psychotherapeutic universe.
Right.
And if Al had continued on the groove that he had studied, then millions of people might not have benefited and have created enhanced lives because the tool of REBT worked for them in a way that psychoanalysis may not have. I'm not saying psychoanalysis doesn't work for some people. It does. And for many people who don't have the time to commit to that long process or procedure, who just don't have rapport with it or like it, REBT can, in a brief time, change perspective, emotions, and lives. So coming back to creativity and the potential of finding solutions when shitty things happen in our lives, by thinking in healthy ways and experiencing healthy emotions, whatever potential we have to be creative and playful has space to breathe and flourish. When we stick to rigid thinking, it's unlikely to happen.
Exactly, and we suffer from it. So, Dr. Debbie Joffe Ellis, how can we find you? I know that you write in Psychology Today, you write in Huffington Post, and where can my listeners find you? And what are you up to for the next year?
Oh, okay, thank you for asking. Well, my website is a nice, quick way to find it. My three names put together as one, Debbie Joffe Ellis, DebbieJoffeEllis.com is my website, and on that there's a page where people can email me if they want to, and they can see some of the video and radio interviews that I've done and read some of the articles I wrote for Psychology Today, and they can also see upcoming presentations. I do teach, as you said, here in New York City at Columbia University, but I also give lectures and workshops and seminars both for people in the profession and students of the helping professions, but also for the general public. And in the website there's an event page that shows what I'm doing this year and next year, and already next year I'm scheduled to present in different places within America and in Japan and in Mexico, and I'm in communication now with someone about the possibility of presenting in China. In January and February I'll be giving 3-day workshops in various U.S. cities, and again that'll be on my website. So yeah, I think the website is the easy place to go.
If you were going to tell people who are listening to you something from your heart that resides in their heart and that would support them in creating a fulfilled life?
Wow, what a wonderful question. So, I really, really, really want as many people as possible, especially those who have had and who currently have very difficult circumstances in life, to make time each day to pause and think of what they can be grateful for. To remember, as bad as it might be, it could be worse. And by adopting, and it's a choice, by choosing to adopt a healthy attitude, that doesn't mean denying the bad stuff. That would be unhealthy. But a healthy life accepts that life will contain some suffering, but that we have potential to minimize it by thinking in healthy ways and focusing on what is good and being grateful for what is good, and frankly being grateful for being alive. You know, some of the most precious people in my life, including my parents, have passed away. Many of the people who loved me the most and knew me the best are no longer here. And it's such a reminder to me that whilst I often ache in missing them, I am still here. And as I talk to you, Dr. Zeine, I'm looking out my window at a most beautiful sky. The clouds are incredible. And I'm so grateful for the time I've got here, for the opportunity to work on lessening any emotional pain, for embracing the challenge of doing so, and for having the willingness to focus more on what is good than on what isn't. So to answer your beautiful question, within us is the potential to live tranquil lives, even when things outside of us are stormy and agonizing. If we remember to go within, and sometimes daily meditation, but some forms of meditation are stilling the mind. That's very good. I'm talking about additionally taking time to use the mind to reflect on what is good in the short time, relatively short time we've got alive on this planet.
Yes. And I'm thankful
to take things in stride and to be grateful.
And I'm grateful and thankful that I have you in my life, and I'm alive, and I love you, and I'm here for you. I've said that before. And
love you too. Thank you.
Thank you for being in my life and on my show. And I hope that we were able to give amazing jewels of your knowledge and tips for people to really enjoy it. And for all of you who are out there, thank you for being with us and listening from your heart to us, and create a wonderful day and a week and a year and a life for yourself. Goodbye until next week.
You're listening to The Inner Voice with Dr. Foojan Zeine, only on LA Talk Radio.